In 1990, China and India had similar nominal GDPs. In 2021, however, China's GDP of 17.7 trillion US dollars was 5.7 times larger than India's GDP of 3.1. What caused this divergence in performance? Hello everyone and welcome back to Mir Media. Today we're going to talk about how India and China have grown over time and whether or not India is now poised to overtake China in terms of the size of its GDP. This video is divided into the following chapters to make it easier for you to follow the content. 1. A discussion of the historical performance of India and China. 2. A discussion of the factors that explain the divergent growth trajectories of both economies since the 90s. 3. What I think the future will look like. And 4. A conclusion that rounds everything up. So without further ado, let's dive in. China has experienced rapid economic growth since 1978. This growth began when China opened up to foreign trade and investment and implemented free market reforms. These reforms allowed China to jump from a low-income to a middle-tier economy. If the rise of China is a topic that interests you, I've done a video on it in the past. I've linked it in the description box below. Between 1990 and 2021, China maintained an average annual growth rate of over 9%, and as a result of the strong growth, it had become the world's third largest economy by 2007, and in 2010, it overtook Japan to become the world's second largest economy by nominal GDP. India's performance over the last 70 years, on the other hand, can be divided into two periods. A first half with slow growth of 3.5% per annum, and a second half with positive momentum and growth at 6% per annum. India's slow initial growth is explained by its Soviet-style economic structure before 1991. India had extensive controls on economic activity and low productivity as a result. In 1991, however, the country opened up to trade and foreign investment. This caused India's productivity to rise, poverty rates to fall, and its economic growth rate to almost double. While India has also experienced strong growth over the last few decades, it has so far been significantly outpaced by China. There are many reasons for this. 1. Differing political systems. China has a one-party political system that has allowed the government to pursue long-term economic policies without worrying about short-term electoral considerations. India, on the other hand, has a more fragmented political landscape with multiple parties vying for power. This setup has made it more difficult to implement long-term policies and reforms, hindering India's ability to keep up with China. 2. Investment in infrastructure. China has invested heavily in infrastructure, building highways, airports, and ports that have helped support its economic growth, while India has lagged behind in this area. China's infrastructure evolution is characterized by new cities and economic zones that have made it a premier manufacturing hub for goods that are sold all over the world. India, however, has poor infrastructure that has been a major impediment to its economic development, making it difficult to transport goods and access markets. 3. Government-led investment growth. China's impressive economic growth has largely been attributed to massive investments in growth that have been at least partially funded or facilitated by the Chinese government. China invests around 50% of its GDP into growth and 30% into manufacturing, while India invests around 30% into growth and 20% into manufacturing. 4. Approach to economic reform. China's approach to economic reform is very distinct from India's and also rather smart. Rather than implement reforms across the entire nation at once, China's government has a pilot-first, promote nationwide later approach to control and prevent potential risks to its economy. China leverages this approach across several sectors, including, for instance, the introduction of compulsory education in 1978, which is what has resulted in China's skilled workforce. 5. Labor productivity. Data from the Periodic Labor Force Survey of 2018 illustrated the gap between India and China in terms of this. While China's workers were highly productive, only 2.3% of India's workforce had received formal skill training. This discrepancy is largely due to India's lack of adequate social security, education resources, and medical services. The factors that have enabled China to demonstrate strong economic performance over the last several decades are still in place and continue to be areas where India lags behind. However, other forces have grown in terms of their strength and might shift the balance in favor of India over the coming decades. The first of these factors is demographics. China's one-child policy has successfully reduced China's birth rate to a point where China now has a shrinking and aging population. Unlike China, whose population is expected to age before it becomes wealthy, India's population is projected to surpass China's with 1.7 billion people by 2050. This means that India will have a large young workforce with a low ratio of dependent elderly people that will help bolster its economic prospects. To truly capitalize on its demographic advantage, however, India needs to invest heavily in education and skills development to ensure that its workforce is well equipped to take on the jobs of the future. As things currently stand, China is also drowning in debt, and its real estate sector, which drove a significant percentage of its GDP growth, has come tumbling down. For several years, China's growth was driven by investments in real estate, but this model of growth is no longer sustainable for the country, since ghost towns with the capacity to house the population of entire countries already abound, as do railways to nowhere. This issue is exacerbated by the sector's high level of debt and the fact that China's population is shrinking, which means that demand for real estate will decline in future. China is also increasingly facing economic isolation from some of the world's largest economies, especially the United States, with which it is locked in a trade war. This doesn't bode well for China's export-dependent economy. China's position as the world's factory is also threatened. The latest data shows that China is losing manufacturing and export dominance to Vietnam, Malaysia, Bangladesh, India, and Taiwan. Global supply chains faced extensive uncertainty and disruption as a result of China's stringent zero-COVID policy, and this led several large companies, including Apple, to begin shifting some of their manufacturing out of China. As China's workforce continues to shrink, wages will get driven up, making it an even less attractive manufacturing center in future. The ongoing technology and chip war between the US and China is also likely to disincentivize American companies from outsourcing their manufacturing to China in future. Before I conclude, I'd like to ask you to please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. You can also support the channel by buying me a coffee. I'll put the link in the description box below. Now back to the video. All in all, as things currently stand, India is presently not in a position to match China's economic prowess, given that its workforce isn't as skilled and its leadership isn't in as strong a position as China's. However, India, unlike China, has ample resources and a growing population that give it the potential to become the next China if it plays its cards right. Thank you for watching the video to the end. I will see you again in the next video. Until then, goodbye.